After getting an idea of how Roman political and municipal systems were affected by the aqueducts, we began to investigate the social and cultural consequences that came along with the flowing waters. You could be thought lazy and careless if you go to dinner without writing a will. There are as many deaths waiting for you as there are open windows above your head. Therefore you should hope and fervently pray that they only dump their sewage on you. This quote by Juvenal from his third satire highlights how aspects of the wastewater system were an issue of concern, and consequently made their way into Roman culture.
People often think that when the Romans started to build aqueducts, it was a demographic phenomenon. People normally think you can sort of estimate the population, because as you have new aqueducts, it means that population went up, so they needed more water for drinking purposes and whatnot. And I really don't think that's the case. I think the Roman aqueducts, it's above all a cultural phenomenon.
Before the aqueducts brought water into the city, water was typically gathered from rooftops through an angled hole in the ceiling called a compluvium, and collected in a pool below called an impluvium. Obviously, the wealthy had more roof space, and hence the capability to collect more water.
For the common people, originally they would have had to have collected their water as well from the rooftops. And this is a situation where they don't have a lot of space in this ancient city. And so many of them would have been dependent upon richer neighbours, people who they would have to then have some kind of political and social relationship within their neighbourhood, and maybe use that relationship as an opportunity to actually collect water from them.
Le case dove abitava la parte, come dire, il ceto medio, se possiamo dire così, o i ceti più modesti, non avevano ovviamente l'acqua corrente in casa.
With the coming of the aqueduct, this changes, this shifts a lot, because what we now have are things like this that we're sitting on here, fountains. About 40 of them displaced all throughout the city here, and so now the more people of more modest means have an opportunity of getting water 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, free of cost, no expense.
Le grandi insule, cioè i grandi caseggiati di appartamenti di Roma, non avevano, suddivisi appunto in appartamenti, non avevano in realtà l'acqua corrente in casa, però avevano una quantità enorme di acqua a disposizione attraverso questa rete capillare di fontane distribuita appunto in tutta la città.
This really changes parts of the social dynamic in the city, we think, and also helps to kind of tie in these sorts of structures to a greater sense of neighbourhood spirit, sense of neighbourhood identity.
Although the clientele system was possibly affected now that the common people could get their own water, it is likely that these political alliances or sponsorship were not done away with by any means.
It raised the bottom. Everyone had access to running water. It was something that you could walk down the street and get. So on the one hand, you definitely have everyone at the same situation. But you don't have probably the rich guy going and getting the bucket of water for himself. In fact, you probably have the rich guy, and then we know several houses here in Pompeii, such as the house of the small and large fountain, for example, that had piped in running water, and that the rich used this as a way to, though the bottom had been raised, to pull themselves further away, so that they can now conspicuously consume this water resource and say, I have the money to pay to have the water piped into my house, even though it's free to everybody.
This beautiful garden in the site of the home of Octavius Cordio gives us an excellent example of the private use of the aqueduct's water. The water was brought in through 2 fountains and was distributed into 2 pools that were aligned in a T shape. Here at the lower T, we see where the water was portioned into 3 basins. These basins were not only home to many different species of fish, but helped to provide water to his beautiful garden. This wealthy style of living, known as the villa style, was very fashionable in the few years before the eruption of Vesuvius.
It was obviously very unevenly distributed from that point of view. The rich had water piped into their own homes, not everyone, but certainly a fair amount of the richest, shall we say, 0.5% or so of the population would have that possibility. For the others, things went on pretty much as before. as far as, getting your daily 10 liters, 20 liters. Before they had aqueducts, they were using rainwater, they would dug wells, they may even have been using the Tiber. And they continued doing so. Eventually Rome had as many as 11 huge aqueducts, but for the common people, I'm not sure that things changed very much as far as, daily cooking needs were concerned.
This large building was home to the servants of the wealthy Popedii family. This family was one of the more politically influential families in Pompeii. And here we can see where the waters of the aqueduct were brought in to come from their decorative fountains in the center of the building.
Basically, it's a cultural phenomenon in the sense that they use the water for conspicuous consumption, for the baths, for fountains. Even in the amphitheater, they might fill the Colosseum or some other venue, and they might have mock sea battles. No, it's for display, and it is, of course, for creating a more luxurious general life.
It is these examples of conspicuous consumption, both in the private sector for swimming pools or gardens, or in the public sense for the grand fountains and water games at the amphitheater, that have had the biggest impression on the image of the Roman world as perceived by people today. And it is these same facets of a cultural phenomena that carry over into modern-day Italy.